and again, everyone. So we are going to really dive in and focus today on the KPIs and with the aim of getting a referral around some of the directions around those KPIs, which will have our steering oversight vote, but we'll hear a lot from the homeless response system team about that. I do want to point out, since we are going from 11 to 1 today, we do have lunch in the back, so people feel free to either get it now, or just as you get hungry during the meeting, feel free to step back and take care of your needs with some delicious food. And again, I want to thank the team for doing that. As a reminder, this meeting is hybrid, and it's also recorded for anyone who is able to attend and would like to watch the meeting. And as I said before, we're gonna just delve into the presentation right away so that we can go through all the materials and then really have a lot of time for discussion. With the aim of referring the KPIs to both the Multnomah County Board of Commissioners and the Portland City Council, similar to what we did with the action plan updates that we did last week. So now I'm going to hand it over to Jillian and Ryan to pick up where we left off. So good morning, Jillian.
That was perfect, Chair. I won't say a word and just kick it over to Ryan. He really is gonna pick up where we left off. So not the whole PowerPoint. So we assume that is okay with everyone.
Let's go ahead and if we can start at slide 12. I think that'll be a good starting point. So good morning, everybody. Ryan Dibert, I use he, him pronouns. I'm the Deputy Director at the Homelessness Response System. Really glad to pick up this conversation with all of you this morning. I want to start by acknowledging that if you're tired of talking about key performance indicators, that might be fair. We've had a number of conversations leading up to today's. And just to remind folks, just sort of from a process standpoint or a milestone standpoint, this group, the Steering and Oversight Committee, is charged with considering and approving key performance indicators for the homelessness response system. So helps us understand, are we moving the needle collectively? This group, we've already walked through a number of conversations to decide what should those needles be, what should those measures be, and then the conversation that we're picking up today is really one about how do we want to go about setting goals associated with those measures. So as we head into the end of our meeting today, or as we come to a close in that process around the conversation, what we'll be looking for from this committee is a vote to refer the 12 existing key performance indicators out to the City Council and the Board of County Commissioners to adopt those as a change through our intergovernmental agreement. And we'll be asking you to do so by referring out both the set of key performance indicators and the approach to goal setting that's outlined here. Because the recommendation, and we'll go through this in some more detail at the end, is so that you all can come back after public budgets have been set, looking into the fiscal year 27, to set concrete goals using the approach that we're discussing today. So hopefully that's helpful orientation. I will say for all of the detail that we talk about with these key performance indicators, all 12 of them, if you were going to put in just plain language, what we're trying to offer you is a set of measures by which you can look across all of our efforts and understand, are we effectively reducing the total number of people experiencing homelessness in our community, including those who are unsheltered? And more specifically, are we doing that by more quickly and effectively moving people into housing? And by creating enough of an affordable housing supply, given the level of need in the community? And then also, are we focusing on better stabilizing individuals with significant health needs to access the services that they need to maintain their housing? We'll also ask, in the biggest picture, are we doing enough of all of that to meet the total level of need that we're seeing across the community? So again, 12 really detailed key performance indicators, but they're trying to give you a framework to understand these primary policy questions. So if we can skip ahead to slide 20. This is where we'll pick up from our last conversation. So we reviewed with all of you the 12 individual key performance indicators. And then we set up a framework by which we've tried to estimate some of the shifts that you would see in those measures with some increased levels of effort. So this is where we left off in our last conversation. I'll pick up here for just a minute as background, and then we'll move it into conversation for the group. So you'll recall this is putting forward estimates for that first key performance indicator, kind of our primary needle. What's the total number of people experiencing homelessness across the community? So this is, as a reminder, this is our actual by name list data all the way through up to the red shaded area. So as of, that's all the way through the end of July. And what you're seeing there is on a month-to-month basis, even though we're sheltering and housing more people than we ever have before, we're still seeing inflow to homelessness outpacing outflow from homelessness, such that each month of those last 18 months, we've seen about a 1 to 2% increase in the total number of people experiencing homelessness across the community. So for purposes of trying to estimate levels of effort, again, trying to help you think about how to set goals associated with moving this particular needle. For purposes of estimations, we've assumed that that 1 to 2% increase month to month continues through the end of this fiscal year. And that beginning in fiscal year 27 with increased level of effort, this is trying to show you what it would take to bend that curve the opposite direction. So instead of month to month 1 to 2% increases, you're going to a scenario here in scenario 1, where month to month you're seeing about 1% decreases each month. So to get to this scenario, you would have to, the estimations that we've been able to put together, that you would have to increase our relative effort across our system by about 50%. So in other words, right now, our system is currently scaled to be able to house about 25,000 people, give or take, in each 2-year period. You would have to increase that to a system that could house about 38,000 people in this 2-year period that's highlighted there in green to get to these kind of outcomes. We also walked you through, if you can go to the next slide, a second scenario, and you'll see this referenced all throughout your document, scenario 1 and scenario 2. This is a more aggressive scenario that would, instead of a 1% month-to-month decline, estimates a 5% month-to-month decline in total people experiencing homelessness. To get to this kind of a scenario, though, you'd roughly have to double our current level of effort. So go from a system that's housing about 25,000 people in 2 years to a system that's housing a little less than 50,000 people in those 2 years. This scenario is the one that when we last presented, I said, given our fiscal realities, I do not think this is realistic in any way. We have doubled the capacity of our systems before, but each time when we've done that, it's been at a point of significant increases in our overall revenue. Most notably last time when the SHS revenue came online. So even though we can make this work with math, the fiscal reality is quite a bit more challenging than might be projected here. Okay, so that was a little bit of reorientation to how we were thinking about some estimates around measure 1. But I want to show you how these hydraulics around increasing levels of effort translate into the other KPIs as well. So if you go to the next slide, we did talk a little bit about KPI number 8. So the first KPI was total number of people experiencing homelessness that we just looked at. This looks at what percentage of those folks are unsheltered as one of the other KPIs to track. So if you'll advance it, again, this is a percentage. So there's a numerator and a denominator. If you'll advance like 3 or 4, all the way through the blue, thank you. So you can either address this through numerator-based interventions. So if you had 1,000 homeless folks, 500 of whom were sheltered, and you opened 500 additional shelter beds, you could get to a point where 100% of folks are sheltered, but you can still have 1,000 people who are homeless. If you look at a denominator-based intervention, if you'll skip all the way through the greens, sorry for the animations. This helps you, like if you start experiencing homelessness, 500 of whom were sheltered, and you housed 500, you could get to where 100% are still sheltered, again, through a denominator-based intervention. So as we were building our estimates to connect scenario 1 and 2 from the first measure into how that plays out in this second measure, KPI number 8, if you'll go to the next slide. Particularly when you're focused on those denominator-based interventions, getting more people into housing. In goal scenario 1, where you have that month-to-month 1% reduction, you'd go from a system where currently right now about 48% of folks are unsheltered to a system where about 41% are unsheltered on any given night. So you would see a reduction in the total percentage of folks who are unsheltered, but not a total reduction. To get that total reduction scenario, you're looking at something more like that much more aggressive goal scenario 2, where you're seeing 5% month-to-month reductions in the total number. By the end of 2 years, that gets you to roughly about 5,000 people who are experiencing homelessness in any given month. And that's the point at which we would have a shelter bed for every one of those folks. So that, again, just to sort of orient you to how we're using these estimates to help you think about goal setting. And so you can see the ways in which they relate to each other. The next couple of slides, which I won't go through in detail, but if you'll flip to the next slide, do summarize the recommended approach to setting goals for all of those other key performance indicators for which you asked us to set goals. And we'll open up some time for discussion around any of these, but I won't narrate through either of them. And on the next slide, to reference in your packet as well, you see how scenario 1 and scenario 2 from those prior slides play out in key performance indicators number 10 and 11, which are looking at the number of people who are exiting homelessness and the subset of those who are exiting homelessness to housing what we're supporting. So that was just meant to be reorientation and catch up. I've given some version of this presentation 12 times in the last 3 weeks. I recognize though you haven't seen much of it for a couple of weeks. So I'll just stop there and see where you have questions and see if we want to enter into some conversation around any or all of this. Go ahead, Councilor Zimmer.
So given the inflow, it seems daunting in terms of the number of groups. So now that we have a by name list, I am wondering how we can apply the by name list as a point in time to particularly KPI 1, KPI 8. Because I say that because I'm looking to see if you're in the Portland system, you're in the Multnomah County system, how we can track for those numbers, because 20% is hard for me to consider to be okay. But if by the by name list, we can look at actual people, actual stories, actual improvements that are, and recognizing that in the year there are going to be new names to that, but we're making a focus on those who we know. This gets back to, I've said every meeting now for a while, it's like I'm really interested in the most contributing factor to a person's helplessness, and this kind of this I think supports that mindset. And what I'm having a tough time is measuring or understanding when you have the 20% up there or the 70% up there, if that is of the current number or in reflection for about what the trend is for the new incoming inflow. And I'm having a tough time with that.
Yeah.
I think that also applies to the KPI 8.
Yep.
And I would just say, well, I've got my hand up on it, KPI 8 with the sheltering. I actually think that my district is probably one of those districts who actually supports a fairly sizable constant of shelter capacity in order to reduce street camping, even if that capacity level staying constant is quite high for a long time, the way some of those models show. to get really at the heart of reducing the number of people every night who are sleeping outside instead of a shelter. And kind of looking at it, moving us more toward a right to shelter community instead of a few shelter beds available community. So those are kind of my comments about this start anyway.
Yeah, let me try to respond to a few of them. You can tell me if I'm getting where you want to go on any of it. So Robin, if you'd move us back to slide 20. So first, when we talk about a 20% decrease that comes out of these estimates, again, I didn't flash up the caveat slide, but I'll say out loud, lots of caveats go into these estimations. Particularly, it assumes that inflow stays pretty constant to what we're seeing right now, that it's not significantly increasing nor significantly decreasing. Either of those things could happen, but most of the current economic indicators are that we may be facing a period of increased inflow rather than decreased. But the 20% decrease in overall homelessness specifically references from that top point at the end of the red shaded area. So from that point where we start estimated increased levels of intervention, it's a 20% reduction from there. You'll see though, if you just kind of draw the line across, it's a 20% reduction from that estimated peak, but it roughly gets you even to where we are right now. So it does assume, to be able to get this math to work, that we are seeing the same month-to-month inflow and roughly the same month-to-month outflow, plus that 50% level of increase to get more outflow.
This is more palatable if it is with a higher sheltering plan, but this as it stands, if it's not also talking about the on the street issue, for me, it's not. It's hard to just do 20%. Well, like that.
And this is where, like, again, we're not asking you to refer a vote out that says, I choose scenario 1 or I choose scenario 2. Rather, the discussion today is, given this framework, does it give you the right framework to say to your colleagues, as we start to understand how budgets are playing out, we can help to tell you where we think that's going. Because these are really, really rough cut estimates. We're not getting particularly scientific in any of this about, okay, what if you invested for this 50% level of effort? What if you invested more in prevention so that your inflow number goes down? Versus what if you invested more on outflow, moving people out of homelessness back into housing? It's pretty agnostic to the approaches. But as we come into the respective budget conversations at particularly our 2 local jurisdictions, we'll start to get you some better estimation tools that get more into those mechanics. What if I did this? What if I increased the number of shelter beds and kept our budget constant? What does that do? What if I decreased our number of shelter beds and put it instead prevention placement? What would that do? So I'll forget you one.
The effort also for prevention.
Oh, great. We've got Commissioner Singleton online, but we'll come back to Ivory.
Thank you. I wanted to talk about numbers 10 and 11. So if the other comments are related to the current discussion, I can wait.
Yes, I just have one comment on the current discussion,
Great.
and that is just for clarification. The KPI goal scenario 1, that's based on the current level of resources in our community. Okay, I just want to.
Yep, exactly. I should say it's based on the outcomes that we are generating from the current level of resources in our community. Little nuance. Commissioner Singleton.
So on indicator 1011, I apologize if I said this last time we met too. I'm struggling with kind of what the difference of this is. So is number 10 really about the by name list? And I guess I'm not understanding what that's going to actually tell us, because we're making some assumptions and people getting removed from the by name list that they're not in contact with us, and I don't know that we can necessarily say that they exited homelessness. I also am unclear if we're implying that they exit homelessness to permanent housing or if there's other things within that. And so that's how I'm struggling to understand, right? Because somebody doesn't actually exit homelessness until they're permanently housed, whether that's their own rental, family or friends, something of that nature. And then, so how would that be different from number 11?
That's great questions. And before Lori hops into some of the different, I'll note that you just helped identify to us where we forgot to update this slide. That
Just
should,
update that.
and we just did. So KPI number 10 should read exits from the homelessness system, not exits from homelessness, to get a year distinction. But I'll turn it over to Lori.
I think you effectively just defined the difference as you were asking the question. So effectively, you need a counterbalance to the inflow data to show what's going on in our overall system. And there are things we can do to have people exit the homeless system, including appropriate places where they might need a higher level of care and so forth. Also, people do flow to inactivity. So this is where we're kind of keeping an eye on all the things we're doing to move people out of our system, but not necessarily homelessness. 11 is really what we can control. So it's people we are moving into housing, either directly by paying for housing or by paying for some sort of service that moves them towards housing into another community. So these are kind of counterbalances. There's a lot more scope of control over 11 than 10, but you'd want to pay attention to both in order to ensure that you're really looking at the overall system.
Thank you. I think it would be helpful to make sure that we're articulating exactly what we mean when we say exited from homelessness system. I'm a wonk, so I get it, but I think this is a hard ask to folks who aren't in the weeds of this. I think a lot of people would assume that you mean that they were housed. So I just think defining what that is in the materials will be helpful. And then my question on number 11 would be, how are we defining shared housing?
Shared.
And I'm working off of the materials y'all gave us, the HRS KPI definitions and recommendations.
We're getting caught up to where you are, document. Just 1 second.
Unification.
All right, Shannon, put some meat on the bones. What do you mean by, like, what's the concern with how do we do shared housing? Help me out. I'm not understanding the question.
Oh, so for my prior work, if somebody moved in with family and friends, it was considered permanent housing, but shared housing might be like a program, like an Oxford House. And so I just think they're a little bit different in that one is, yeah, it doesn't have necessarily the same time limit. I just want to make sure we're all operating from the same definition.
We can get more clear on that, but in general, anything that is going to have an end date to the intervention is not considered exiting to permanent housing, and that includes transitional housing and kind of group housing where it's sort of a temporary therapeutic space that's going to move on. That in our world is actually considered a kind of shelter. And so it would not be considered exiting to permanent housing, whereas if you have a group home where you're permanently there, that obviously is a permanent space.
Thank you. I think, yeah, and I'll pause after this. I just think it's going to be critical that we make sure everybody is clear on some of these pieces that you're asking us to vote on. So thank you.
Yeah, Director Matthews and then.
With KPI 10 and 11, exiting homelessness system and then exiting homelessness to housing. Is there a possibility that people are counted twice in these numbers?
No, they are, I'm sorry, to answer that. They are just, one is a subset of the other, but they're not counted twice. That's the best way to put it. So yes and no, I guess is the best way to put it. So people exiting homelessness to housing is a subset of people exiting the homeless system, but they're not counted twice. They're not duplicated within those sets. Does that make sense?
No,
Okay, I apologize.
no, because if you are exiting the homeless system to housing, right? You're exiting the homeless system,
Correct.
Right.
so you're counted twice.
So the way I would say it is KPI number 10 counts anyone exiting our homeless system to any destination. KPI number 11 is just that subset of number 10 who are exiting the housing.
Gotcha, subset.
So just, given this discussion and Commissioner Singleton's, points also, I'd encourage us, like, we're trying to get to a really streamlined, very focused amount of measures to know how we're doing. So I would encourage us to pick one of these and then track the other one as a thing that we need to understand, maybe for how the dynamics are working, but we want to use this as an exercise for focus. I think we should reduce it.
From 10 down to 11 specifically.
Yeah, I agree.
We can eliminate a KPI. If that's what's being
I
asked,
would
yeah,
also make 11%.
okay.
Well, hold on. So we voted on these KPIs already.
Yeah.
So we have already voted on these. I think what we're talking about is because we actually have several KPIs that we are going to be tracking, but not all of them are going to have goals attached that we are actually going to be like measuring from the achievement standpoint. So I don't want to eliminate and say we're not going to track this anymore because I do think there's value because we do have the data. I think it's more of like, which of these are we actually going to be like putting a goal around that we will be like thinking about as we're budgeting.
Okay, so let's back up. Let's back up a bit. So it was 2 or 3 meetings ago that y'all approved the what? Y'all voted on the 12 KPIs, everything that is highlighted in yellow in this document. We're now just discussing the goal setting approach, and we've given you some scenarios in blue so you understand the hydraulics of the system. Okay, but we're not asking you to pick a specific goal or goal scenario yet. That will happen in July of 2026 because there are so many more unknowns than we thought when we started this process with you. So in the most practical terms, what I want you to adopt is this document in full as written right now. And then as more things get known and we make our way through the fiscal year 27 budget process, we have a whole bunch of real data, essentially a new set of actuals to plug into this tool we've created that is informing all of this and the charts you've seen and set very specific goals in July of 2026. But you need this. Every elected leader needs this in hand over the next 6 to 8 months, 7 months.
So last meeting, when we said we're gonna come back to the KPIs, that wasn't actually what we said.
Phase 2, phase
Back to
1
goals.
was the what, and y'all voted and approved that. We're now on phase 2 and talking about goal or approach to goal setting. But if there is a desire to get rid of 10, for example, we're still going to measure it. Like that is still going to happen. All of these things are going to still happen, regardless if they are the final set of KPIs or not.
So explicitly, explicitly, we're setting up goals with the goal in the budget cycle, then to budget for those particular activities we need to reach that goal.
You're gonna have this enhanced, so yeah, every activity that you are talking about, you will know where it contributes to our KPIs and up, down, you know, its effect on the KPIs. And so this is what Ryan is offering, that through over the next 7 months, as things become more real, and for example, to use the obvious example, when we know when the government's back open, right? Federal government back open. When HUD releases its federal NOFO on the COC funds, the county will have 30 days, and I don't know when exactly we'll find our awards, but that's $36 million that's going to affect this, that all of you have no idea what the decision is going to be yet. And all of that is housing. So it would be irresponsible right now to set a housing placement goal, knowing $36 million worth of housing could disappear in 45 days. That's why we're not asking you to get specific, but we want the framework in hand so that every elected official knows what the hell is going on as they make their votes. You cut this, you're going to screw with this KPI. You add there, oh, you're going to help with this KPI. We will have those constant discussions during the budget cycle, particularly at the county. some education of the state for the short session, like that kind of stuff.
And,
Just noting the Commissioner Singleton has her hand up too.
and I'll just add before we transition to the committee. You know, when you think about KPIs from an 11, in that kind of a around those budget setting conversations, you're gonna the elected bodies in setting budgets are gonna have a lot more impact on KPI number 11. Because that's where we make our direct investments as a system. KPI 10 is inclusive of a lot of folks' movement out of the homeless services system, some of which we fund, some of which they're able to achieve up through their own access to their own communities and resources. So anyway, an example of how those conversations.
As maybe as the person who's responsible for starting this, I don't need to avert the process. I also would encourage us, we are going from a level of complexity in a plan that you guys have done a great job at shoring out. I would not, where we find ways to simplify it and make it more clear about what we're holding ourselves accountable to without blowing up process, I'd encourage us to keep an open mind about how to do that to make sure we're really focused.
So we've got, good. Councilor Zimmerman, are you still? Okay, so we've got Mayor Stovall, Commissioner Singleton as well. And I didn't catch the order that folks had their.
I think it was Commissioner
Okay, Commissioner
Singleton.
Singleton. All right, and then we'll go Stovall and Zimmerman.
Thank you. So on number 10, one, I want to say I agree. I think that was Mindy, but the screen's very small in the room. I agree with the let's be open to being flexible, because number 10 is one to me that's like an indicator of system, but not necessarily something we have a lot of control over. So I think with the edit you've made to exiting homelessness system, that is much more clear to me. The other one I wanted to raise was number 9, people experiencing chronic homelessness. The recommendation is yellow, is indicate positive direction, reduce net chronic homelessness over 2 years. I would rather see that say population A, because as I've asked you all more than enough on POP A and chronic homelessness aren't the same. I think that chronic homelessness, the way POP A is defined according to the SHS measure, is more expansive, and that I'll be interested in understanding chronic homelessness disaggregated from POP A. But at a minimum, I'd like the recommendation to say reduce net population A homelessness over 2 years if we're tying ourselves to that SHS definition.
So you want, Commissioner, you want POP A added to what's written in yellow?
Correct, instead of chronic.
Got it.
Okay. So basically taking some of that definition that already says that. Okay, great.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Stovall.
Thank you, Chair. You know, I'm super supportive of our KPIs, our goals and our goal setting. And, you know, I'm going to reference Mayor Wilson, so primarily because he's referenced this before. I'm sure all of us have this bent that at some point we've got to have a move towards action. You know, and we could talk about, you know, the KPIs and the goals until, you know, 2028 and always be refining them. And at some point, we do have to move towards action. And, you know, we've talked about it a few times that this has to be an iterative process, you know, over time. It has to have something, it has to be something that we hold ourselves accountable to, but we also have to have the flexibility that Minnie just referenced, you know, as we move towards actually executing on these things, because I know every single day, the work we do in Gresham, it changes constantly. But I think we do need to have these solidified, you know, as we continue to move forward so we can hold ourselves accountable. But I also encourage us at some point, you know, we've got to be able to say, okay, we've got enough there to now move towards action, because that's what's needed, that's what's required, and that's what our communities want. So at some point, you know, I don't think we can keep opening these back up and keep having the conversations over and over. Refinement's good, iteration's good, but at some point, I think we've all got to look at it and say, okay, you know, we're good enough for today. Let's move towards action, and then let's move towards ensuring that we've got the opportunity to iterate as we move to get things done.
Thank you so much, Mayor. I appreciate that. Wholeheartedly support that.
Could I quickly respond just?
Okay, so I know we're not actually in the discussion, and we wanted to get through all of the slides. So I'm just. wanna
Oh,
make sure
No, we're done.
Fully in the-
No,
We're done.
y'all are discussing.
Okay, great. Then we are. Okay, I didn't know how many more slides we're going to cut. Okay, great. Please go ahead and respond.
Oh, all I was gonna add, well, two things. Couldn't agree more. We want to get to a point where we have a set of KPIs that you all as a committee are able to review and monitor on an ongoing basis that can help guide that action. This is that step to get there by referring them to city council or board to roll it in. And also don't want to lose sight of the significant pieces with this group agreeing to move forward the homelessness response action plan in its current iteration. There is a lot of action that's already ongoing under that plan. You haven't seen as much of it being reflected back because we've had these conversations, but for instance, doing a lot of work right now in partnership with the health systems to try to identify those folks with high acuity behavioral health conditions that we can be targeting better, more effective housing interventions at. And that gets directly at one of our KPIs that is looking at keeping folks in housing with high acuity behavioral health conditions. So don't want to lose sight of the fact that we're also doing a lot of work in the meantime, but agree with you very significantly. Thanks for that interjection.
Absolutely. Okay, Councilor Zimmerman.
So in some of these different scenarios where we have goals listed, going from 50% to 90%, it says increase effort by 50% or increase effort by 90%. There's a vagueness there that doesn't allow for a rational decision making if I don't know what it represents. If these are designed to be taken back to our respective bodies, to then be budgeted against. Do we have more concrete numbers that can be right there with them to say this is the current? So when we say 50% effort, this is what we mean. It means 25 million from the city of Portland and 15 million from the city of Gresham and 5 million from the city or the county of Multnomah. Do we have that? Because I don't know how to make a judgment on those scenarios without understanding capacity.
So.
I could speak to that a little bit. So the thing that comes next around these choices would be some scenarios that we're developing. They're not modeling, but there's something between modeling and accounting, and they would effectively be here are a suite of interventions that you could choose that would equal 20% or 50%, which range from prevention to outflow interventions, and then attached to those, presumably, what are the costs of these interventions? And then the next step is where does that money come from? And so our hope is if you're settling on, we're willing to go to a place where we want to say we have to put 20% more effort. We can say these are the various levers on each side you could push and the relative cost of them to get you there, and the decisions would be at play. So there is a next step to this.
Okay,
And for that to work, it does require that baseline understanding of what are we currently investing in through each of the jurisdictions. Yeah.
So I do find it that it could be helpful in budgeting to be able to point to those, right? I've got a council, my own body, who on Wednesday is likely to gut most of the city's homeless services program on Wednesday this week. Being able to cite, this is the impact of that, given what you all are proposing relative to what we signed as part of an IGA would be helpful. And I think we've got the whispers of being able to do that, but it's hard to put like a directness to it. And I think what I'm hearing, the way the state's discussed is we're hoping for a directness. If you invest this much, you help this KPI. If you defund this much, you hurt this KPI. There's not enough meat on these bones to be able to do that yet. So, I mean, we're going to face the first reality of this on Wednesday.
I don't think what's discussed in the amendment, I think that's happening to you on Wednesday. I don't think those are inputs into this. IRP's budget is not an input into the tool behind this, correct? It's not. So
Everything related to Portland Solutions is at risk right now, and Portland Solutions is who does sheltering in this community. And so it is at risk in some sense, because when you put any of these on there, you hear where this group of counselors are going. My point being not to argue the amendment, but it's like, this is the scenario where you're asking members who sit on this body to be able to point to their colleagues who don't, to say, this is the impact that you could have on this KPI.
Oh.
And I'm just using Wednesday as an example of it's coming now. It's not in the future. It's today. It's now.
Yeah, okay, and so just to sort of clear that up, I wanted our shelter operations money on the table this week. I did ask that question and I was told no. We'll see what council actually does, but I hear you, but know that we're watching and asking questions to understand.
Yeah.
Like if those monies are disappearing or if that ends up happening on Wednesday, absolutely, it's going to affect us.
I'll just- sorry, like, so, Scott, sorry. For that specific amendment, that is not what we've seen. There are whispers of other amendments. I think the councilors
Yeah.
speaking to other discussions that might happen.
Yep,
Let me pull the thread, though.
yeah,
If we no longer abate camps, we also increase the incentive to stay outside instead of to move to shelters. The shelters are 50% unoccupied at this point. I'm operating from a position of camps that are unwieldy and unsafe have to be abated. Part of that abatement process makes shelter a more palatable option. Everything is more palatable than the street, but folks are in a loop of decision-making that sometimes keeps them from going to a shelter. I'm operating from a position of shelters are better than the sidewalk. And so if I no longer have a program that cleans up those massive camps of 2021 and 2022, then we have a problem in terms of these shelters that have been made available being used at a high rate. I'd love to see 90% occupancy, not 50% occupancy. And this is all for naught. All of these are for naught if we stop cleaning up camps, because the SHS funding will quite literally never pass again if we return to 21 Portland Circuit. So it is interconnected.
Mhm.
And if they're willing to go after that, they're willing to go after everything. Because I've got counselors who have been from the dais screaming about why is Portland paying for shelters? Held that. It's important to help, but it's very fragile. That's the point I'm trying to make.
and if you adopt this and refer this out, it becomes a tool for conversations that I can show up at city council or whatever and say, hey, what y'all are talking about doing?
Yeah.
You know,
Thanks. Yeah.
And I think the intent of what we're working toward right now is giving you talked about a directness associated with being able to understand how those hydraulics trade off for these outcomes. That's very much our intent, is to build some tools that help you to do that work. Especially as we head into the FY27 budget season. So when we get these nailed down, we're able to start constructing those tools more effectively. That's where we hope to go.
Can I say one more thing about that too, to that end, which is, this model that we're showing you right now, for your comment about the binding list, is not frozen in time. It's assuming lack of change. Our intention and the reason we're pushing out the actual numbers to budgeting is because things will change. It may change our scenario. This may change our scenario. You're going to be looking at a slightly different scenario with rebalance that will allow you to actually play with these numbers based on what happens in the interim. So the intention is not to stick with this and then end up having antiquated benchmark.
Okay, great. So just so everybody's aware, so the speaking order at this point is myself, Mayor Wilson, Ms. Suarez, and then Commissioner Singleton. Okay, so I enjoyed this conversation because I think this is really critical to how what we're doing today is going to be really important in the conversations that each of us who are elected officials are going to be having in our bodies in regards to the budget. To your point, Councilor Zimmerman, yes, it's a little messier right now because we just did our state rebalance for HSD, and that's things from when we started this conversation a little bit ago. The conversations you're going to be having in council this week are going to change some of the currently operating things, but that's why I think it's really important for Lori and the staff, both at the city and the cities and the county, are working with our respective budget offices to really tie together for us electeds the pieces between these are the kind of existing budget allocations that have been made. This is where those are resourcing the system that we're talking about so that we can understand, you know, if we're going to be allocating more dollars to housing placement, this is going to move the dial over here on this KPI. So that's something that I'm going to ask that we have as you know, so that you can help us make the decisions that help us each as elected officials build the system that we want to build. I think the other pieces are those things that, you know, for instance, if the HUD guidance comes out and it's none of the dollars can now go to housing placements and they're all going to shelter, like, we're gonna have to be adjusting for that at the local level, I believe.
Yep.
In order to make, to, again, understand where our investments are going to be, making the difference in the system based on the decisions by other parties. So I'm just saying that because my request is that there be, you know, a lot of really good work and conversation happening between the staff in the respective, county and cities, departments and the budget team so that we can have that.
Yep.
Chair, I have to excuse myself. That's why I got in hot at the beginning of this, because I have to go chair a committee meeting.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much and appreciate your, flexibility with the time today. Okay, Mayor Wilson.
So many conversations, so many different threads, with so much uncertainty without knowing of month to month. And to your point regarding modeling, this is such a difficult discussion. I just want to make sure, like Councilor Zimmerman, the maintenance effort, while I appreciate that, the primary funding party is through the SHS measure, the 150 billion. We certainly see HUD in usually tens of millions of dollars. We certainly have seen through our IGA, a Portland commitment, and then a county commitment through general funding. So those are kind of our notes. That's the funding we have. That's the funding we have. So just want to make sure that we're focused on outcomes at some point. What are we going to want to do? And Julian, I think I heard you're looking at really that fiscal 27 is when we're going to look at what are our outcomes. And these are all processes we're going to get there. But to Councilor Zimmerman, you know, we're going to make commitments to some degree, but they're not hard and firm. But we have hundreds of millions of dollars to execute these things. And our job here, as I believe, is to kind of focus where our priorities are right now as we create the outcomes we want to see, right? So there's nothing hard and firm here on funding expectations other than us coming together from collaborative settings. And what are we going to tackle? What are our KPIs? Is that, am I? All right, I just want to make sure that, you know, Councilor Zimmerman, I understand, and he's right, you know, we're not making funding commitments. We're focusing on a collaborative, iterative process as we go along.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Decision, really just to inform and educate our respective, you know, all the elected officials that if you really do want to go to a 70% decrease, it's gonna, the resourcing is gonna need to look like this. And so, you know, to really have that in mind at the forefront as we're making the decisions of things. You,
I just more wanted to just make a comment that I want to put a little something in everyone's ear to kind of think about. One concern that I just have for sort of our future when we're reflecting back on what progress we've made around is that there's a lot of emphasis, and this is to the comment that I just heard, there's gonna remain around right now, currently, like we have a 50% vacancy in our shelter systems, and that seeing an increase in shelter volume is tied directly to seeing an abatement of camping on the streets. And I think that's a fallacy that we're leaning into because our shelters are vacant and our houseless folks are not engaging in them. And because I do think there's a fundamental narrative and experience tied to being in shelters. And so one of my concerns is that we are going to see a bubble of our effort that will sort of eventually come back to a state where folks are not engaging in that system. And what I just want to say, the generalization is that if we're seeing shifts, and maybe I could be wrong, but this is based on my personal experience and what I've experienced with folks on the streets and their desire to engage in that system, that we seek to understand what that experience is so that it can better inform how our shelter systems are operating and the desire of the folks on the street and our houseless community to engage in them. Because I do think that's what's going to happen. That's currently what's happening. And so just because you ban the camping on the street, double the number of shelters, and we tell people this is where you're going to go, there is a fundamental experience that's happening there that keeps people from going. And all we're going to do is shift that. If we keep people from being on the streets, they're going to find a place to go. And that's probably going to be the hospital systems and other places. But you know what I mean? So it's more just, again, a comment of like, let's keep that noodle in the back of our head, because that has been my experience in the last 2 years of working with this population. I don't see that experience changing until we sort of understand feedback from folks' experience in that system and whether that is feeling like the system is failing, they're not getting the resources they need, they're not quickly getting moved through, or whatever it might be. I do think it is going to inform the long-term success of that arm of this entire work, right? And the shelter system being a singular arm of our effort. So it's just a
Chair. Correct response, I think it's been said a couple times, I think, correct. It's just a 50% number, like, I think it's talking overnight shelter utilization, so it's not accurate. It's percent right now because of the weather. We can get a more precise number and send it out to folks. It's been up 300% since like in October, basically, so weather is reviewed, I think, so. But I just wanted to add that first one.
Good. And I will just, I mean, I'm just gonna do a plug. I mean, there was and I really appreciate your points around with experience and we're experiencing the systems that we're building. I just want to give a plug for the short film that Walker just put together, which is actually using the voices of people who are experiencing homelessness in our community to talk about what was needed in their experience. And I think those things, in addition to the advisory committees and especially those with lived experience, is incredibly helpful. So that one was get you the link out after that, but that was something is about finding lasting solutions for the community expertise. So you're all looking to that. Commissioner Singleton.
Thank you. And I couldn't see who had made that the original comment, but I really appreciate what you uplifted there and the experience of folks. And I think it's part of the conversation here is also blurring lines between what the city shelter and the county homeless services system shelters look like. I've been very open about, I think they are two different interventions. The city is responsible for public space management and the county is responsible for homeless services. And I think that's a question that city and county electeds are going to have to wrestle with as we move towards the next budget, because otherwise we're creating duplication that I don't think is effective for the folks on the ground. And I've been having some conversations with city councilors that I think have helped us all start to understand these two different roles and responsibilities. The other thing that feels important to say is when we talk about unsheltered homelessness, we tend to focus on shelter. And I just feel like it's important to remind people that the community sheltering strategy also included goals around permanent supportive housing, that our unsheltered strategy also includes housing placement focused street outreach, that day centers are a part of the unsheltered strategy. And so it's not a one size fits all. Everybody's journey back into housing looks different. And I think we tend to over focus on shelter and not some of the other interventions that are really also effective at helping people end their homelessness. One thing I wanted to raise that is not a number 6 on the indicators is really more of the recommendation is to kind of watch how things go regarding folks who are doubled up. I just wanted to put on the record that I would really like to see us seek opportunities to engage with the folks who are directly in these categories. I think a lot of people would not identify themselves as being homeless, even doubled up homeless, depending on this definition that's in the handout. I think that different communities would look at this really differently and that it's kind of a normal situation. So I wanted to flag that because sometimes the language we use doesn't speak to people and so then they don't self-identify. The second would be that I think it could be important to tell us what types of housing we should be developing, as opposed to thinking that we may need to develop more individual, like single apartments or smaller apartments for people. We may actually need to be looking at how to develop something that actually speaks to and works with that culture's way of defining their family and their household. So I'd love to talk more about it. I know it's not, we're setting a hard goal around it, but it felt important to raise since we're voting on these today. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner. Other. Mayor Russell.
I just want to focus on what Laura said, and thank Scott and Brendan for jumping in. Just to kind of understand the framing of a new resource in Portland. That Portland, the city of, has been adding 50% or 70%. The overarching issue is that, like an emergency room, you never want it to be full or overprescribed. our current county shelter system is overprescribed, it's full. And we see unsheltered homelessness increasing. So the Portland system is being brought forward, so we have life-saving care for everybody. Last week, we had 39 people move from the street into shelter because of the enforcement action that we did. It was the highest number of moves from the street to shelter that we've experienced in 6 or 7 years. I'm gonna, Commissioner Singleton, be quick to say, no, I had this or I got this. That was a huge win last week. We moved people from the street into life-saving care. To Sky's point, I want everybody to know, we always need 200 to 300 empty beds every night. That is my mandate to Sky and to Brandon. We are never going to let somebody who's ready for shelter to not have shelter ready within hours. Our current shelter system has a wait list of 4, 6, 8 weeks. That has got to end. And that's what we're doing in Portland. So we've added a whole new leg of the continuum. And it's called life-saving emergency shelter. We never, ever want it to be fully prescribed ever again. So I just want to make sure you understand what we're doing here in Portland, what we've added. And last week was our most successful week to date. So we're going to continue, and that's a known that we don't know what the numbers are yet. We'll know more in 2, 3, 4 weeks as this process continues to unfold. But last week was a complete check. You've seen a methodical plan unfold over the last 10 months. And this is just the next iteration in that plan. So we'll be able to measure it more in January, February, and March. So these are the part of the knowings that we want to do. So thank you, Laura. I hear you.
I'd love to know how that's accessed.
Yeah.
Capital.
You bet.
Any other discussion on the KPIs or what the action is with this today?
I'll just
Yeah, thank you.
finish by saying, I really appreciate the conversation. Feel like I always come in here and I learn something. Broadly speaking, especially as somebody from the more as a business representative and, you know, the goals, and as you're looking at these numbers, when I hear effort, I really like to see something around accountability and continuous improvement. That the system, that we're always looking to make the system better. And we need to, as a group, we need to hold ourselves accountable to finding the best solutions given the moment. I mean, I call out how we created the SHS when we went into COVID and the world completely changed and we didn't have a system under which we could pivot for the moment. Fentanyl crisis hit at the same time. And there wasn't either a communication plan to present that, nor was there really good data so we could pivot the system and provide the solution. I feel like we're creating that here, but within the effort has to also include not just spending more money, making the system more effective, efficient, better. So that's the only thing that I really would love to see. And maybe that's in the framing. I don't see some of that language tied up in the framing of the goals of this continuous improvement and accountability.
I really appreciate that, Peter, because I think some of this is, you know, we're not to something Ryan said earlier, we're not in a situation where we're going to have resources double anytime soon. And we're actually probably going to be in more of a constrained environment based on what's happening at the federal, state, and local levels. And so therefore, we have to have a more efficient system. And we have to be, I think, better aligned about, better informed about what each budget allocation that we do, where it is actually moving the system and making sure that it's doing that in the most effective way. You know, we're already working with the Homeless Services Department on how can we actually stretch those dollars more to serve more people with the same amount of money. We're all going to have to do that. So Mayor, I think when I hear you say, well, we want to make sure that we have 200 to 300 beds empty each night, that makes me feel very uncomfortable as I'm thinking about what is the dollar amount of those empty beds each night and where else could that be used? So we can have more conversations about that, but I just, and I think that there are other areas in our system where we can be looking at where are the places that we need to be doing work with the amount of resources that we need. So I don't know that that's in the KPIs themselves that we're talking about. I do think that is something that we've had as kind of a foundational concept as we've been doing this work and setting up this SOC, but I don't know, are we talking million and
Goal area 5 of the plan
okay.
is solely dedicated to that. So you're gonna see the, what I shared with you all a while ago around the shelter evaluation, the pathways evaluation, which is more what you speak to, Laura. And then the rapid rehousing evaluation that are, happening right now. And, we'll at least have the first one done this December, so we can make some decisions about the shelter continuum in particular. And the whole continuum, not just O&O versus 24/7. But just last week, so that everybody is aware, the Homeless Services Department recommended to the Board of Commissioners, and they agreed to shift instead of 140 brick and mortar shelter units, that were in the plan, and we were looking at bringing online, we've shifted away from brick and mortar to a scattered site motel voucher program for those units. It's half the cost. Do we have to figure out how to serve those scattered site motel rooms really well? Absolutely, but we got to problem solve around that because we needed to save some money. So,
I'll make just a quick comment, to what Peter just referenced. I absolutely agree with that concept. And I think the absolute missing component to all of this is this group right here. I tell my team all the time, I'm like, the SOCHRS is the missing piece of this puzzle that we just haven't had historically. And we've got all the right people sitting around this table. And I believe this is the business community's opportunity to hold us accountable, but it's also our opportunity to hold us all accountable and continue this process improvement. And I think the makeup of this SOC and the HRS is absolutely gets to your comment. I do believe we have to hold ourselves accountable to exactly what you just said, and it's absolutely this table that I think could get us to that outcome. And I've already seen from my seat, positive advancements, movements towards where we need to get to.
Mayor Wilson, and then,
So I noted a month ago when we began, I'm gonna vote for this. We're talking a lot of activities, not a lot of outcomes, but I'm gonna ask for it. But one of the points I made with Jillian going forward, I need systems diagnostics every single meeting. I need to understand the system, because you can't do continuous improvement if you don't know the diagnostics. So the diagnostics I've asked for, reunification, I want to know how many that we have had. And I can tell you, Portland, in the last several months, I've sent 150 people back to their loved ones to 40 states. I know the city in the Midwest that's sending the most people to, and I have a call with that mayor coming up. That's diagnostics that I can action. That's continuous improvement. Where's the inflow to Portland? I'm calling the mayor. It's one small city in the Midwest. You can bet something's going on, and I'll ask him how I can support them. That's the continuous improvement process. The next is bed utilization. I've asked Joanne, I need to know, and Brian as well, what's the utilization of the current county system so we can understand the why? How do we improve utilization? And then average length of stay. It went from 23 days in 2017. It is 77 today. And if we had the same 2017 throughput, we would have enough shelter for every person on the street, or almost every person. So that's a diagnostic issue. And Jillian and Ryan, those are things I want presented to us at the front of every meeting, so we can ask why, how can we improve the system? And each time we improve it, we save lives. So I just want to frame it. I've talked about it the last meeting. I could argue until I'm blue in the face about how frustrated we all are. The reality is, let's just work together to change what we're doing to improve outcomes. What we really are focused on.
thank you. So we'll have Director Matthews and then Ms. Allen. I will just say to that, Mayor, briefly, I appreciate that. I think we do have data that we do have tons of data. I think getting a snapshot of things that we're all as a SOC interested in, because I think, when we talk about flow through beds in our shelter system, I agree that the more efficient we can be with our flow through, the better we are at serving people who are currently have no other options. And what that means in terms of what we need to be doing for housing development or taking advantage of vacancy capacity. Like, I think those are pieces of the picture that I would be very interested in seeing as we're talking about the things that we're working at the diagnostic look at. Okay, Director.
Yeah, so one of the things that I've been thinking about for some time is, and this goes back to conversations that I have with colleagues outside of the state of Oregon, I talk about like some of the data points, that we've been able to accomplish and I know that we have a heavy lift and people are thoroughly surprised at like the positives that we do have. And I think that sometimes our media points, things that rise up to the local media might not be able to categorize all of those positive things with the resources that we do have. And I'd like to see us one day, maybe as a means of accountability from this group, is to have like an in-person state of the housing convening, where we talk about here are the positives that have happened, even when our resources are limited. But here are some opportunities as well. So we know we have a heavy lift. We know we've got some things that we've got to work towards. But I think it just really will be a better communication piece to the general public, who sometimes might not be getting the whole picture. And also better communication piece to our entire system. Because sometimes we're only looking at the piece of the puzzle that we're working with. But I know for me, every time I come to these meetings, I learn something new, and I am extremely appreciative that this group exists and that we are working together to improve the areas where we know that we have opportunities.
A couple things that I just wanted to comment on or raise a question around is that I think, listening to the conversation around bed utilization and those numbers fluctuating with the seasonal changes as well. I'm also just curious about in terms of practices, and maybe this is more a question for the Community Advisory Committee and how kind of their advice is rolling up into this as well. Because I think about like police coming, we're talking about abatement. I'm thinking about, police presence at campsites too, makes it feel like less of a choice for folks when they're identifying what to do and what their experience is in the shelter system. If they're going to go, I would go to a bed before going into any sort of system. So I'm just thinking about that power dynamic. And I'm also just raising the fact that I think the Community Advisory Committee plays a really important role in this conversation too. And I don't know that I feel like I've heard enough from them. So something there. Yeah. Oh, and then I guess the other question is, in terms of timing, because I know we talked about July or June or July is having a more, like today's action is really just to refer it to the respective bodies to have a discussion, but I'm just curious how that timeline lines up with the current budgeting process for the county and the city. If it comes in July, then we will have wrapped up this budgeting cycle. And I just didn't know if this is just meant to be a tool for discussions around those decision making, and then there's going to be an adoption of that afterwards. And I think I'm also just unclear on what the process is if there's not agreement between the county and the city in approving these.
So if I'm understanding correctly, so we would ask both governing bodies to adopt this document as their guide through the fiscal year 27 budget process. The inputs into the tool behind all of this, though, will be fiscal year 25 actuals, our rebalance, the city's rebalance, if there are any influences there. I think that's TBD, as we discussed a little bit ago. The federal NOFO, when we come out and know what it is, the city will get its general fund forecasts December 1-ish. We'll get ours this week. The SHS comes out mid-December. Like all of those are important information to inform all this. And then we'll walk into our fiscal year 27 budget processes, which will be hot and heavy starting February 6th on the county side of the equation, soon thereafter on the city. And we are going to use this document with elected officials as a guide to any relevant decisions. And then come back in July and fill in these where you see the X's for ones that have specific goals. That's what you will fill in July with all of these, all of the facts. I hope the ground is more secure and solid underneath all of us. I really feel by that point we'll have enough information to be responsible in our specific goals that we choose. But it's not until that time where all of the elected bodies will have that information, I think, to do it.
So then we're diving into update it based off of.
Yeah, and y'all will come back together and you'll be picking specific numbers to fill in those blanks.
Effect-
And then the clock starts July 1, 2026. So if it's a 2-year, there's a 2-year timeline for a goal, July 1, 2026, the clock starts ticking. Going a little bit bigger than that, sorry. So if y'all adopt this, we go for votes in December. If they don't, if either body doesn't approve it, then we have more work to do. We as a team will have more work to do. So we'll get there when we can get there. That's the best way I can answer that question. The work won't stop. So if we do get them adopted in December, we do our final report in February of 2026 on the current KPIs, because it's a look back, right? Then we leave those behind us after February. Our next quarterly report is May 2026. It essentially becomes a baseline. So we'll have yet another set of inputs. We'll update all of this in May, report out that baseline to all of you. The budgets are approved end of June. We'll update it again. And then we'll come to you in July 2026 with the most up-to-date goal scenarios possible. So y'all can make responsible yet bold decisions around goals.
Thank you, Jill. And I just want to recognize that Nikki Dolan, who is the chair of the community advisory group, and attends almost every one of these meetings, and that there have been like the recommendations, the KPIs, all this body have gone through both the implementation committee and the community advisory committee for us to contemplate. But I do think that it's really, I mean, our community advisory committee for the list response system, as well as some of the other advisory committees that the departments have, the city has, right? As we're thinking about these budgets and these budget investments, hearing from them, it's going to be important.
And some of the most powerful work that I've seen in these oversight structures like we have with HRS are where you all have clear goals that you're driving toward. And to the mayor's point, where you're seeing those regular updates in like where we are, you're able to put questions to the CAC like, hey, this isn't moving the direction we want. What do we need to change? And they're in the weeds of that work every single day and have that lived experience to be able to bring back good answers to you all for how to adjust some of the program. It can be really effective.
And we haven't brought it up, so I want to just interject it into the conversation and then y'all can decide where you want to go from here. But like, let's pretend for a moment, like the priority decides to be increasing housing placement, right? To reduce both overall homelessness and unsheltered homelessness, because that's the only way you reduce both, right? But we haven't really talked a lot about housing production today. Like, if the governing bodies decide to increase housing placements, we definitely need to where, and that means buying down the existing units, new construction, all of the above. And we haven't talked about that yet, but that's also a big piece of the hydraulics of the system here.
Probably the biggest mistake right there.
Yeah, for sure.
At least in my mind. Yep.
Yep.
I agree.
Okay, just reminders, we have delicious lunch in the back, so feel free to step back and grab something. All right, any other discussion on this? On any of these things? Commissioner Singleton, that's right, Commissioner Singleton.
Thank you. I just want to confirm that my request around Pop A will be edited in, and you'll add the language from the slides to number 10 to specify that it's from the homeless system before we vote on these.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay, so why don't we move on? Anything else from staff before we move on to referral votes? Okay, so as a reminder, the way that we walk through this is just to go to a 1, 2, and 3. 1 is a yes, 2 is one is a yes, I support these wholeheartedly. 2, thank you for moving to that slide. Two is that the participant agrees with the proposal, but would prefer to have it modified in some way in order to give it full support. Nevertheless, they are still voting yes. To move forward, even if their suggested modifications are not supported. And three is that indicates a refusal to support, so equal to a no vote. And we'll go and we'll ask all of the members of the SOC to share their vote, so that we get a sense of where the entire group is at, and then we'll go and have the elected officials or the voting members do a second vote. And because Commissioner Zimmerman or Counselor Zimmerman had to step back, I believe we need all four members present to elected members present to vote in the affirmative of a 1 or 2. Correct. Okay, perfect. So so why don't we go through and have a vote, and folks want to share? And we can do that. Anna, do you mind if we start with you?
Sure, move on.
Okay, Chris. We're going to skip Wendy, all right? There,
That was to refer it, right?
to the elected bodies, yes, and I should have been more clear. This is a vote to refer the definitions, the KPIs as amended in the way that Commissioner Singleton just shared to the city council, the Portland City Council and the Multnomah County Board of Commissioners. Mayor Sobel, I just want to verify there isn't an intention at this point to move it to your council, correct?
Correct.
All right, great. So we have a 1 from Anna Allen, we have a 1 from Mayor Wilson. Mindy, Mindy sat under and it's indicating she is a 1. I am a 1. 1. Okay, Commissioner Singleton.
1.
Okay, that's wonderful. Thank you. I appreciate all of the work on staff on this. Now we'll just go through for the to just the voting members. So Mayor Wilson, we'll start with you. 1, I'm a 1.
1.
Mayor Sobel is 1. Commissioner Singleton.
1.
All right, thank you all very much. We have unanimous support for referring the KPIs, definitions, and recommendations to the Portland City Council and the Multnomah County Board of Commissioners for consideration before the end of the year. So thank you all for that. Now I just wanted to share a couple of next steps and a brief update. So I did want to share that I had a really great meeting on Friday morning with the mayors of Fairview, Troutdale, and Wood Village, as well as their city managers to talk a little bit about the upcoming budget process for FY27, as well as just, checking on how county work is going with them. But although we have this kind of representation for aggression, we are looking, it is a priority for me to make sure we're continuing with our city partners, other city partners in East County as well. So I just wanted to share that update. We have a joint work session this week on Thursday afternoon that will be from the Portland City Council and the Multnomah County Board of Commissioners. Jillian, do you want to talk a little bit about what that agenda is going to be?
It's going to be the action plan and the KPIs. So essentially getting them up to speed. We have had some one-on-one meetings with folks and some small group meetings with folks to tease out what has been happening regarding the action plan and KPIs. So it shouldn't be brand spanking new to the rest of the electeds. But that is sort of the official briefing on both pieces before we move to December for the actual votes. That's it. That's all that's on the agenda.
That's great. And it's, and then the slide that's showing now is looking at what we are going to be asking the boards and the council to vote. So December 4th, for the Multnomah County Boards of Commissioners, and December 11th, report to the council.
And then the final slide, if you could move forward. The final slide is just a slide on what I said earlier, which is the next, actually, let me back up a second. You're actually going to get a quarterly report on Monday. The November quarterly report you'll get on Monday. You'll get the one in February. Then the May 2026 will be the baseline of these new KPIs. So that's sort of the next quarterly reports. The clock starts ticking July 2026 on the new set of KPIs and our goals, and you set specific goals in that space. Yeah, I will. Any questions about that? Okay. I'll email these slides to you directly so you have that. And in addition, our next meeting is, we're probably getting to this next chair. Okay, go ahead.
No, that's fine. So our next meeting is actually going to be the day after Portland City Council is scheduled to vote on these. So we're going to be meeting on December 12th from 10 a.m. is that right, 1 p.m.?
Yes.
Meeting. So, we will. So we will reconvene there. We'll decide on the location and share that out with everyone, but appreciate it.
And that meeting, by the way, it's a all committee meeting that's required by the IGA. We're putting together the agenda now, but one of the things on the agenda, Mayor, will be sort of how do we want the structure of our meetings to be in 2026? And I think everybody is bought into sort of a few moments reserved at the beginning of every meeting to sort of share good news. Then we'll pick and choose some data to focus on, because there's a lot of data, but sort of the key data points from the dashboard that are reported out monthly. So you'll see that at the beginning of every meeting, and then we'll have the meeting, whatever is on the agenda for that day.
Appreciate it. If I could be of any help, I would love to be at that table. Thank you.
Yeah.
And with the participation at that meeting of our community advisory committee as well as our implementation committee, it's a chance to get to build some relationships among committee members, to get to understand some of the expertise that each of those folks is bringing to the work, and to create a sense of common purpose across those three committees. So it's a longer meeting, but it is serving a good purpose.
Okay, so just to be clear, the next SOC meeting on December 12th is actually us meeting jointly with the implementation committee and the community advisory committee.
Yes.
Excellent. That will be something I can follow forward to. Great. Okay. Anything else for the good of the order? All right. Thank you everyone so much for all the great work today and great discussion. There being no further business, we are adjourned.
Ollie,